Isaac, I suppose for sake of time, I could start on that train of thought even.
Yeah, go ahead. People can join in as they arrive.
Sure. So yeah, with that context, thanks, Yuri. Um, I'll keep that in mind as I'm going through this. As I understand, you're using our regular rotating proxies right now. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, great. So yeah, I'll go through this. So residential proxies. So it sounds like you're not using it right now, and I can give kind of like a brief overview. We're also recording this, Yuri, so I appreciate you giving this context for the viewers. If you don't mind that original context, you didn't give anything sensitive. So if not, please let us know afterwards. But I'm going to present this in a general way as well too.
We also have a new attendee. Hello to Derek, and let us know in the chat if you'd like to join in by voice.
Derek. Hi, Derek. I recognize you with Proxy Pilot. So good to have it. We have two in here, and we'll see if more join along. But I'm just going to kind of go through it. Residential proxies are better than any other proxy. I think that's the best way to say it. But they're also the most expensive, and we'll get to reasons like why they are more expensive. But the value that residential proxies provide is these 3 bullet points: anonymity, authenticity, and band reduction. They're all kind of about the same thing. You could use whatever adjective you want here to say they allow you to do your work, primarily scraping, more effectively than any other proxy type. And the reason for that is, and we'll talk about more and more slides, but at a high level, is that you're using a literal end user device. I'm going to slide over here. We have, I can actually show us, I didn't think about this. This is really great. We have an app right now. It just got live actually this week called Cache Raven. And what Cache Raven does, you can find it on the Google Play Store, is allows users to install our app, Cache Raven. We developed this app. And once you're on Wi-Fi and your phone is idle, so right now I'm not idle, but if I lock my phone, I'm idle right now. So it allows you, the customer of a residential proxy, to use this device. And when you think about the value of that, it becomes clear why that's valuable, because it's using our residential ISP. And so, and here in Lincoln, Nebraska, where we're tuning in from, our Allo is one of the bigger ones. Charter Spectrum is obviously a nationwide, US nationwide provider, and you're on those Wi-Fi networks. And so if you're scraping a site, let's just say you're scraping Google, for example, and Google sees that you're coming from an IP that says Charter Spectrum from someone's home versus a data center IP from our Sprius ASN, or we have other ASN providers that we work with, Google knows that, hey, this is a residential IP and this is a data center. It's very obvious to tell the difference between the two, technologically speaking. And so that's the value. The value of residential is to say, hey, look, I'm a residential user because I'm using this as a proxy. And so as let me go to the next slide here, which is better? So when we look at your data center versus your residential is better. But as the bullet point says here, is if you can use data center, you should. And the reason for that is cost. So when we have those phones, people installing our apps, we're paying them. So Blazing SEO is acting kind of as an intermediary, where you as the customer is paying us for the bandwidth, and then we're paying end users and handling logistics with all of that. And so the price per gigabyte is what you're charged on, whereas on data center proxies, to get bandwidth in a data center facility is very, 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 very cheap these days, pennies on the dollar. And so we're able to offer unlimited gigabytes for data center, and that's obvious. So if you can scrape a site with data center, you should, because you're not going to pay per gigabyte or per scrape or anything like that. It's just you send as much traffic as you can through that data center IP. Where you get in trouble, or where you need to use residential, is where if sites are very aggressive on banning data center IPs, which are going to be more static by nature, We do have a rotating data center pool as well, but those are even static. It's just like a static list of around 10,000 IPs that never change. And you need more fresh IPs, that's where you need to look to residential, which is going to be more expensive. So what we work with clients is crafting the right solution, architecting the right solution to say, hey, what sites do you need? Which IP sources are best for your needs? And we can work backwards from that. We work with so many customers that we can tell that which sites work better for others. For example, Google is very hard to scrape with data center IPs these days, but Amazon is pretty effective with data center IP. So that's just something we learn with talking with so many customers, that we can architect the best solution to answer this question of which is better. The importance of ethics is you're asking yourself, okay, someone installs this app, this Cache Raven app on their phone. What are they signing up for? How do they know they're signing up for? Well, we make it very clear in the Google Play listing. So again, you can search Cache Raven on Google. It's just up, so it might not even be listed like if you go in the search bar yet, but we can follow up with that if you're interested. We make it very clear, hey, you're installing Cache Raven, our app, to earn money by sharing your bandwidth and your IP address. Here's what your IP address and bandwidth is being used for. And we define all of our use cases that our customers at Blazing SEO use residential IPs for. So we're very clear up front, and it's a very transactional business relationship with the end user device. And we consider that to be very ethical. We're saying, hey, you're signing up for this. You know our customer is going to be using your IP to scrape or other use cases. Do you want to sign up? And if they say yes, that's a business transaction. They made that determination they want to do that. As we write here, we didn't enter this residential market earlier because we didn't see an obvious way to do what we're doing now and what our competitors have done over the years. You can find, I won't mention names, but you can find reports about them online that are very clear on the unethical approaches they take with acquiring IPs. So some go to the extent of malware, or very close to that definition of malware, where people don't even know at all that their software is installed on their computer or device, yet they're being used as a residential proxy. But then the spectrum is very wide. Some just like hide it in a little terms of service, like, hey, by the way, by signing up for this site or app, we're going to use it as a residential. And that's still even kind of hiding it way too much. So we went to the full other side of the spectrum and said, hey, listen, we believe in ethical acquisition of residential IPs. It's this transaction we're going to create. Are you sure you still want to sign up? Here's exactly what to expect. And so that's from like the acquisition part of stuff. But we also vet from the customer side of stuff. You listening to this video, we vet the use cases and monitor usage of our customers to be sure they're fitting within those use cases that we're telling our end users that our customers are using. So if we tell our customers we're only allowing web scraping, which is our primary use case for Google and Amazon, just for example, and then one of our customers starts scraping, insert any porn site or otherwise, that an end user would be like, wow, I didn't want this traffic. That creates a bad ecosystem, and we don't believe that's for the long-term benefit of the customer or the end user to be cutting corners and trying to make more money by cutting these corners. So we're always going to be keeping in sync the equation of what our customers are using and what we're telling our end users they're using it for, and we'll also give statistics and data to those end users. FAQs. This should hopefully give some more ideas and context around things as they answer these. What use cases are available when we talk about our residential or Blazing SEO residential IPs? Scraping is the most absolute one. If you're doing scraping, that's our primary request is for people needing enough residential IPs to scrape at scale. But there are other use cases that we discuss on a case-by-case basis, and that's where we have you reach out to us and we ask ourselves, does this fit within our ethics? Do we believe our end users accept this use case as an ethical use of their IP address? And we have that, and then we add that to our process and workflow that, okay, yes, this is an allowed use case outside of scraping. And we go through that. So reach out to us if you don't if you're not sure, if you're not doing scraping, we're happy to have that conversation. Can user, for our residential, again, rotating residential, I should be clear, can user control location and rotation of IPs? We have limited functionality on location targeting right now by countries. We have smaller pools, like in the US with our current small pool that we're using. And then rotation of IPs, currently it's just every request. So every request you send into our residential pool, you get a new IP every single time, which is the most ideal for scraping, obviously. Is residential compatible with HTTP and HTTPS and SOCKS? SOCKS is in our pipeline. It's a different technology to do that. So as we're just introducing ourselves to the market, we're still kind of in beta technically. You can't just sign up on our site and immediately start using residential. You have to talk to one of our sales member and so forth. And so SOCKS is on our roadmap. So if that is something you need, please reach out to us and say like, hey, I'd be willing to work with you guys, but I need SOCKS. Great. That helps us like say, okay, this is actually a higher priority than we have it currently in our development pipeline, but obviously HTTP and HTTPS. Can residential proxy usage be detected? Of course, and I'll get into Proxy Pilot here soon and what that is, how it can help people. But in terms of being detected, a residential IP on itself is I shouldn't even say basically, is undetectable. If I'm a user, I'm here in our office, if I go to any website on my browser, I'm not going to be blocked, period. So the simple answer is yes. However, once you start introducing software, your scraping software into the equation of what you're scraping, just for scraping use case, for example, it creates a lot more variables to be detected. So you have your headers, you have your cookies, you have what software you're using. Are you using Puppeteer or Chromium, or are you using curl or Node.js requests? And depending on all these variables, you can be detected even with the residential proxies. Like one example, the other day we had a client that was testing a residential and said they were getting banned on every request. And we asked them for their example code, and they gave us a curl example, and it was just literal curl amazon.com / like some product, and then our proxy, no headers, nothing, and just it's just that's an easy thing to block if someone's connecting, not loading any JavaScript on the page, which is what Puppeteer helps with, but obviously no headers or anything. So yes, residential proxies can be detected, but not on their own right. What happens if a target website blocks the IP? Because you get a new IP every time, it doesn't matter with our residential rotating proxy solution. So every request you send, if you do get banned, you just send another request in, and you'll get another IP. If that gets banned, you just keep sending, and it's just a round robin. And as our pool grows larger and larger, that becomes less of a problem. And I'll talk about Proxy Pilot in a second and how that helps with this exact problem that everyone faces too. Like at the end of the day, you don't want to have bans in the first place. And I'll talk about that here in a second. How big is Blazing's residential pool? We have around 300,000 IPs right now. And we describe that on our site and how those are sourced right now. And Cache Raven is our newest acquisition method that we're growing slowly with. And so we have multiple sources to help spread out our diversity of reliance on a single source providing this pool. But over time, as we grow more and more, and I recognize that we're not as big as the bigger players. What we advise and what we've heard from a lot of customers too is they don't work with some of the bigger players, and you know their names, because it's questionable how they're acquiring 100 million IPs. And one of the largest providers, just in March, there's a FBI sting on a torrenting software, and it just turned out that this competitor was actually they were proxifying that torrent software to hundreds of millions, and they got shut down, obviously, and everything. And so it's just like, well, we tell our customers, ask yourself, is that safe for your business practices to work with 100 million IPs? But if they're being acquired illegally, you know, that's a business question and risk that you have to take. And so we're growing our pool slow and ethically along the way. And over time, we'll get to those numbers, or in the millions anyways is our goal. So Proxy Pilot. So I've mentioned that a few times. So with our residential proxies, we require right now to use this software called Proxy Pilot, soon to be open sourced, by the way, fully open sourced with no restrictions. And the key word of it is it's a proxy management. So if you're doing scraping, again, I'm targeting scraping as a primary use case of residential IPs here for this webinar. If you're scraping, you have one goal in mind, and that is to have a successful page loaded so you can parse it for the data you need, period. Anything else that happens, more times than not, you don't really care. It's just, I need my HTML back so I can parse it. So we asked ourselves, took a step back and said, why are so many people and so many developers spending time worrying about cooldowns? If you're using static like data center IPs, like you can't hit one IP a million times per second to a site, it's going to get banned, right? Retry logic, we talked about the retry example. So if you do get banned with our residential pool right now, your software has to detect, okay, I got a 404 error, I got a 403 error, like Amazon gives, et cetera, et cetera. You can, or CAPTCHA, you're detecting those CAPTCHAs, you're having to detect all those things. And then your software say, okay, if I see I got banned, I got blocked, I need to retry again. All these types of concerns can be solved by a tool, which is Proxy Pilot here. And so we created this tool to work with our residential pool in this manner so that you don't have to worry about any of these things. And here are some of the features that we have today. And so to use our residential proxy pool right now, we require you to use Proxy Pilot because we want to solve that. We recognize it's an additional burden to people to accept this new software, but we still believe at the end of the day that what people want the most is that HTML, and everything else, if it can be microserviced, which is what this is, and it will be open sourced, by the way, why not microservice it instead of bringing it into your normal code base? And so real briefly, handles retries, so we talked about that. Handles cooldown logic between reusing an IP address again. So again, if there's certain sources and certain sites you're scraping that can use data center proxies, you can use Proxy Pilot to say, hey, for domain1.com, use these lists of data center IPs with these cooldown timers and this type of retry, ban detection, et cetera. And then for domain 2, you can say, this is a really tough site, use the rotating residential proxies. And so you can start using this microservice code base to start configuring all your different sources to be as cost effective as possible. So it handles cooldown between reusing IP. So data center IP is definitely the most relevant with that feature. Detects bans. So there's HTTP codes, there's URLs. Like sometimes if you get banned, it just has like / like forbidden or something. We can detect that easily. And I mean, the most obvious and easy one is we can do a regular expression on the HTML. You can configure this to say when that HTML comes back after you use a proxy on a site, what's on the page? Is there a CAPTCHA? Does it say a known ban signal, like, hey, you can't access this site? Proxy Pilot can detect that. It parses the page using Node.js, and it handles the retry for you. So that comes back to that first bullet point. So once it detects that, before it comes back to your software, think of 3 points. There's you, there's Proxy Pilot, and then there's the target website. So you send your request to Proxy Pilot. It determines which IP to send to because it's controlling all those sources that we talked about in bullet point 2. It sends it to the target site. Target site returns the data, and you detect, hey, it's banned. Proxy Pilot is detecting it's banned. It does not go back to your software. Your software is just waiting. So it's still stuck in the Proxy Pilot middle, the point number 2, and it retries to a different IP and a different IP and a different IP all the time while your software is over here still waiting. And so once it finally gets a successful request, then it comes back to you. So you don't have to worry about any of that, detecting it, retrying it, the cooldowns, et cetera, because Proxy Pilot is handling that in a microserviced environment. Geo-targeting, I briefly talked about that, but even with our data center proxies. So we have over, I want to say 14 countries now that we support with our data center proxies on Blazing SEO. And if you need IPs in certain data center regions, even, and even more with our rotating residential, I said that we have limited functionality there. Proxy Pilot allows you to do that as well. You just you pass a custom header that doesn't get forwarded to the target site that gives that tells Proxy Pilot, hey, I only want to use IPs in my pool that are from a certain country or city or otherwise. And then Elk, for those who are in here, Elk is a beautiful, beautiful thing. I just, the geek in me loves what Elk is. Our VP of technology has primarily led this effort on Proxy Pilot and implementing Elk. And the quote I give from him was that he said, Neil, I'm starting to wonder if I love Elk more than my wife. I spend more time with it some days with Elk than with my own wife. I mean, it's just a beautiful, beautiful stack of technology. You have Elk stands for Elasticsearch, Logstash, and Kibana. And we implemented that with Proxy Pilot. So we're giving access to Elk here very soon to our current beta customers. And then once we open source Proxy Pilot, even more so, you'll have access to all of this in one bundled repository, and you'll get to use the power of Elk yourself too. Here's this in a quick, this is just one dashboard example of Elk that we have running for one of our use cases. All these, this is Kibana for those that aren't familiar with Elk. So Elk is, again, Elasticsearch, Logstash, Kibana. Kibana is the visualization of all this data. And so you can create all these different types of widgets to show you all kinds of information that you want. And so in this case, you can see the target site on this one is Amazon primarily in that pie chart in the top left. And you can see the success rate and so forth. You can visualize anything you want once you have this in your own hands. And so that'll be in your hands very soon with current beta testers, but in the open source, obviously too, we put all the raw data into Logstash, and then Kibana allows you to visualize that. So that comes to a wrap. I know we're early at time here, but to give a summary of what I wanted to accomplish today is to, I mean, the big points: a residential pool being ethical, a residential pool needing Proxy Pilot as an important point, but why is Proxy Pilot the value why use Proxy Pilot, and what value can it provide? And we don't believe anyone else in the market has these things all combined in a single place. Believe me, I admit there are residential providers that have more IPs in their pool than us. That's a certainty. There are residential providers that don't even charge per gigabyte; they just charge by thread count even. And I would advise you to ask yourself, how are they doing that? Because that means they're not paying their end users per gigabyte. So are those end users allowing unlimited? And it makes you question, is it a botnet or otherwise? And so there's ethical and business risk questions that we talk with our clients with when we're architecting a solution. But then there's the data center side. You don't always need to use residential, which it sucks heaven to say that to you, but we want that transparency because we want to help. If we help you grow, we believe that you're going to work with this long term. We've had clients work with us for almost 5 years. We've started the company 5 years ago, and they're still with us today because we keep driving those costs down for them. They're going to be loyal to us. So we're happy to work with you and figure out the best solution. We just need to know what sites you want to scrape, what volume you want to scrape at, if there's any other restrictions like geolocations and otherwise. And we're going to give you the most cost-effective solution, whether it's data center or residential, and get away with our scraping. So thank you all. Reach out to us, please, at this email if you have any questions. Isaac, do you have any final thoughts, or do we do any Q&A? And maybe if people want to raise their hand or write in the chat since we have time.
Absolutely. Everyone, if you send me a message in the text chat, I can either ask your question for you, or I can give you permission to actually be able to speak on this Zoom call, talk directly to us. While anyone who's interested is doing that, I'm just going to echo what Neil said. about the ethics of our residential proxy program, which is why we've stayed out of the market for so long. And now all of our competitors, right, go to any of their websites, most of them will have a page on ethics, and they'll talk about how they get consent, from the people whose proxies they're using as the pool. But that consent will be like, it'll be a terms of service that's a mile long, and somewhere in there it's like, hey, we're going to use your phone as a proxy, and you just click accept. That's not informed consent. Cash Raven, our acquisition app I have on my phone right now, I have encouraged family members to install it, and it's, tells you exactly what's going on right up front. We are using your phone as a proxy. That is the purpose of this app. Big opt-in button, informed consent. And it's going to ping you every month to, it's going to ping our proxy pool people every month to say, hey, we're still using your phone as a proxy. Is that something you want? This means our pool is going to be smaller. It means our proxies are probably going to have to be a little more expensive. But, everything that Neil's been talking about, like two things. We want to keep everyone who's trusting us with their money, their data, their time safe. We want them to have a good experience. With you guys, we want you guys to have a great scraping experience. For our Cash Raven users, we want them to not have to worry about what their phone's doing. And we want to be able to live with ourselves. Of course, I'm our head of marketing, so I am the spawn of Satan himself. But even I wouldn't feel good if we got busted in that kind of FBI sting, if there were all these third-party documents coming out about how we were doing this or that unethical practice. And so that's really what I think is going to set our residential proxies apart. I mean, find me another competitor where we have invited all of our customers to sit here and have a chat with the CEO about residential proxies. I mean, find me somebody else who has this level of transparency and I'll take it all back, but it doesn't happen. And so I really feel good about the fact that we are setting the standard in that area.
Thanks, Isaac. Yeah, we've got a couple questions here from Yuri. Yuri, good question. So if y'all look at the chat, Yuri's asking about, we have a data center rotating service right now, which has some limitations. One, your IP rotates every 10 minutes and not on every request. And two, that pool is finite and static. That would be the right words. The first one's self-explanatory. Second one is our current rotating data center pool is around 11,000 IP addresses, but it allows unlimited gigabytes again for one price. And so back to one of those first slides, these new residential IPs, these rotating residential IPs, if you are getting by with the current rotating data center IPs, absolutely keep using those because you have unlimited gigabytes. If you're not being charged on any per usage, it's one flat fee for access to that pool for an entire month, which you'll definitely get more value out of than paying per gigabyte. The price difference between the two of them, as we talk about those two prices, our current pricing for rotating residential in beta right now is $2 gigabyte. We definitely, I can say we definitely intend to increase prices once we're out of beta, but we will not be anywhere near the, dare I say, atrocious pricing of definitely the largest providers out there that are wanting $15 a gigabyte or something. It's no secret what we're paying our end users. Go to cashraven.io. That's our site. That's even in beta too, so I hesitate to even share that here. But if you look at the site, we're not hiding what we're paying our end users. We're paying them 10 cents a gigabyte, which actually is times 2 with how the technology works. It's about 20 cents a gigabyte we're paying them. And so if you look at 20 cents, we don't need to be charging $15 gigabyte. But there's obviously a ton of overhead and logistics with paying out to 1 million end users, support to a million end users. So like those costs drive up, and that balance will be struck once we're outside of beta. But for today, it's $2 a gigabyte for our rotating residential. For our rotating data center, you pay a flat rate per port, and per port that you purchase gives you access to 10 IPs that will be rotated between. So if you buy 100 ports, you get access to 1,000 IPs, and the price differs from what those are. You can check that out on our site at Blazing SEO, or the pricing page, and look at the rotating option there. So thanks, Yuri, for those Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah, definitely want to emphasize that this is a new product offering, but we are still committed to making
Yes.
all of our existing proxies and our existing products as good as they can be, and those are going to continue to have unlimited bandwidth and all of the features you've come to love.
Yes. Okay. Well, without any other questions, thank you for those who joined. We will also be posting this on our social media channels just to have
Yes.
that out there for those who couldn't make it, which is important as well. If you have any questions, please reach out to us, support Blazing SEO. I'll for those who are watching this right now, personally, I will talk with you. I appreciate your time. I know we're all busy people, and it's great to see some faces on here today.
Thank you so much, everyone.